Hi, I'm Canadian Proud. You may have seen either of these two shorts. Now, I'll show you a full in-depth breakdown of how I made this custom man-face dynamic head. This one doesn't use Roblox's face control system, which is what they use for their dynamic heads lineup, but this is advantageous for me because I can set up my own system and have full creative freedom on how I design this dynamic head. So I don't recommend making dynamic heads this way because this is far too complex than what is necessary, because it's much easier to just make a 2D animated texture to make the facial animations instead of this. But if you want to make a high fidelity 3D rig for Roblox, then you can definitely use my method or something similar. So here are a couple of important things that I found about Roblox Studio that set the technical limitations that I have to work with. So here are two objects. This is a rectangle that is rigged, and it has an animation. If I go to the animation tab and check all of its channels, you'll see that for all of these bones, all of their transformation channels are animated, have location, rotation, and scale. Now focus on scale particularly because that's important. Going back to the layout, I have this other object here, and it has a shape key, which changes its shape. So I have already imported these two objects in Roblox Studio. They are massive, but that's because of Roblox's import settings. I didn't set them up properly. So this is the cube, right? I've already imported an animation into it. Now watch what happens when I play it. So it looks to be normal, but something is so it looks to be normal, but watch what happens when I play it side by side. Do you notice something different? Pay attention to the bottom. So let me show you the answer to why it's different. If I select the bone and go to its properties tab, you'll notice that it only has position and orientation. There is no scale property. And that's when I learned that bones in Roblox Studio don't have scale property, because bones are treated as attachments, and attachments don't have scale. So that's a big limitation to bone chains like what I've done here. Now, for the second object that has a shape key, if I select the mesh and try to look for the shape key property, you'll see that it's not even here. That's when I learned that Roblox doesn't support shape keys for meshes. Now, I am aware that the dynamic heads lineup use some form of shape key based system, but right now it seems to be that the shape keys are exclusively for the dynamic heads lineup, and any meshes that don't use the dynamic head lineup and controls and whatever shape they don't have the shape keys option or whatever. So that's another limitation that I have to work with. Okay, so let's get into how I made my man face dynamic head redesign. So first of all, I need to model the face. And why is this keyframe? So first of all, I need to model the face. And so what I've done is that I took the original decal as well as the head that I'm using as a reference. So I got this model prior to the dynamic heads update, wherein all faces have been converted to dynamic heads. So that's how I was able to get this original version of the man face. Although I believe you can still get it through images online and then just have it projected onto this head mesh. As far as like getting the original head mesh, I'm not sure how you would do that. I haven't gotten to finding out how to do that as of yet. So that's how I got this head model from, and essentially I just modeled over the decal from this perspective here, this front perspective of the head. And so what I've done is that I made a near perfect recreation of the face decal as a 3D model. So as you can see, while there are some imperfections, this is mostly accurate. I got most of the details done. There's still a bit of loss of detail, such as the sharpness on the eyes here, but I had to reduce the geometry as much as possible because I don't want the rigging to be too complex on me, and I also want to make a version that could be more compatible with lower end devices, because this has less geometry than the official dynamic head. So as far as I remember, the dynamic head has closer to like 4,000 triangles, whereas mine, which is just this alone, just a face mesh alone, it only has 400. So that's like 10 times less geometry. So because I have to make a compromise of reducing geometry, details will be lost, but like that's a compromise that I have to take in. So so when I made so as to how I made the parts of the face, basically I just added a vertice or like a plane, and then I just started with a part that I want to recreate. So let's say I take this, I'll extrude this, and then I'd extrude this out, and then keep on extruding. Okay, this is bad. Let me just scale these 0. And then I'll flip this so that you can see it better. So basically, this is how I started the modeling of the face. I just grabbed the plane, or in this case, a vertice, and then I just extruded it out, and then made it fit the basic shape of the part that I'm recreating. And then once I'm happy with the shape, I add more details by adding more edges, and then I just smooth it out and move it into this shape that I wanted to make. So using the transform tools, I just quickly make this. Then I'd add a center edge loop there so I can get the roundness on these edges here. There we go. So that's how you would make the brows. So this thing is made entirely out of 3D geometry. There are no decals on it, even though I should have used some, because some of the extra geometry is not necessary. So this is how I did the eyes. Because, so if you notice, there's a different amount of density in terms of geometry. So like different parts of the face have varying density in geometry. So the brows are fairly dense because they need to be able to deform and make various kinds of shapes. So I want them to go up like this, maybe something like this. I would even want them to go like this or something like that. So they have to have a lot of geometry to accommodate for those movements. As for the eyes, they're only going to be moving up and down. So this upper and lower eyelid here, they would only need to move up and down so that they can close around here, right? They don't need to move side to side, so I just kept the geometry simple because they don't need that. But I still added some geometry so that when I project this onto the head using a surface deformation mesh to project it onto, it can still have the curve, you know. And then for the mouth, it's a similar treatment as the brows. There's a couple of edge loops. It has a bit of edges, not too much because I don't want the rigging to be too complex, and I want to make it expressive without it being too complex in terms of rigging and like performance. So that's what I did for the brows. So that's how I made. So that's kind of like my thinking process when I'm modeling the face. Now the eyes are interesting. I'll show you the teeth in a bit because they use a similar process for what I did for the eyes. But basically, the eyes are just, well, I should call these pupils. The pupils are just hovering ever so slightly above the eyes. As you can see, it's just a, it's literally just a plane that's hovering ever so slightly above the eye sockets. And the idea is that the eyes will be able to move around the the eye socket, but then I also want it so when the eyes close, it doesn't look like the pupils will clip pass through, because if I move this down, you'll see that the pupils seem to be not following, right? So what I want to do is to add a couple more geometry to the pupils, like what I've done here, so that when I move the eye socket down, the rest of the pupil moves down with it, right? This is roughly the vision that I was thinking, that I had while modeling the face. So that's why I designed the pupils that way. So the teeth are not here in this mesh because they don't look good. And I'll show you once I get to the actual rig. So let's go to the rig now. So deform bones. So this is all the deform bones. Deform bones are the bones that control the deformation of the mesh. They hold all of the vertex weight paint data. And so each of those vertex groups are grouped to these bones. And so these bones therefore control the movement of those vertices based on weight paints. So if I turn on the wireframe, you'll see what I'm referring to by adding more geometry to the flexible parts of the face. So the eyebrows, they obviously need to make various shapes. So I added a lot of deform bones along the center edge here so that when they move up and down, they rotate from like the midpoint of the parts of the geometry. So that's why I place these bones along this center, the center running edge loop. And then for the teeth and the mouth, I put every single deform bone on each of these vertices because I want to have as much control as possible on how the mesh deforms. So that's why I put all of these deform bones on each and every vertex here. Now, the eyes are simpler. They only need to move up and down, so I just have deform bones placed on select areas. Some of these are not necessary, but I put them there for redundancy just in case if I need to make the eyes more expressive, but it turns out I didn't need them at all, so I just kept them there. So because these bones only need to move up and down, my main concern about these bones when I'm doing the rigging is to have them so that when these bones blink and come together to make the eye blink, the mesh stays straight and uniform so that when the bones come together, it doesn't distort the mesh too much and break the illusion that the face is flat. Now for the eyes, you'll see that I have a couple of bones that are placed on each horizontal running edge here. And the thinking process for this is that when I want to have a mechanism bone here that's controlled by the location of a control bone that controls the blinking. And so that mechanism bone will act as a floor for all of these bones here. And then I have another mechanism bone here. And so the idea would be to use those mechanism bones as floors, and then have a floor constraint on each of these bones that target both of these bones. And so when those mechanism bones move down with the control bones, it will push these bones down. So imagine a mechanism bone here, it goes down. And then so this first bone here will go down once it reaches a threshold around here. Then once this mechanism bone reaches around here, this will reach the threshold for this other bone here to go down as well. So now these two bones go down. And then same thing for this third bone here. So the mechanism bone will go down here, reaching the threshold for this third bone, causing it and the other two bones above to go down. And then that cycle continues on to the last bone. And then same thing happens when this lower eyelid here moves up, and then this mechanism bone moves up as well with it. So it's floor constraint system, and then these deformed bones are constrained in a way that they will be pushed down or pushed up depending on the position of the mechanism bones here and here. So that's the thought process there. And then you'll see that I have this root bone here, or not root bone. This bone here is just to hold all of the static meshes. It contains the vertex group data, vertex weight paint data for the static meshes. So it will be these creases here as well as this one here. This is what the teeth look like in their default state. And while it does look weird, this is a restriction that I have to work with because when I'm assigning these deformed bones, I need to make it as easy as possible for me to assign them to, because imagine if the teeth measure like inside the lips, because I don't want them to be like outside the lips by default. Then I'd have to squish these meshes and like fit them into a very tiny space. And when it comes to me rigging, when it comes to me like assigning these deformed bones to the teeth here, it's going to be quite difficult because I would have to like, it's simply going to be difficult for me to like having to clump all of these control bones and mechanism bones onto such a tiny space. So that's why I have these separated this way. And while it does look weird by default, I use a lot of clever ways to fix that once we get further into the rigging, when I get further into the rigging process. So I'll show you now. So we're moving on to the mechanism bones. So mechanism bones, these bones assist with the deformation bones. They just help the deformed bones do what I want them to do. I don't control these bones. They're meant to be hidden, but they work behind the scenes to control the deformed bones the way I want them to. So Roblox's game engine doesn't support bones completely because, as I said earlier, bones do not have the scale property in Studio. But what I can do is I can parent the deformed bones onto these mechanism bones. And what I have here is a mechanism bone chain. And so if Roblox supported scale for the bones, I would just align the deformed bones this way. But since I can't, I have to do it this way. But basically, because these mechanism bones are not deformed bones and therefore are not affecting the mesh geometry, what I can then do is parent these deformed bones to their respective mechanism bones, and then just and then just have it so that the deformed bones do not inherit their scale from the mechanism bones. So basically, when I rig this mechanism bone here, this is part of a spline IK chain. If I show you the rig, so you'll see that these deformed bones here, I have an armature constraint and it's targeting the mechanism bone here. So as you can see, left brow underscore spline IK2, it's this bone here. Basically, if I move this control, you'll see that the bone moves along with the mechanism bone, right? And because I have a limit scale modifier here, or constraint, that basically makes it so that the bone does not inherit any of the scale from this mechanism bone. So what I've essentially done is make a dummy spline IK chain, parented the respective deformed bones to their mechanism bones, and then lock their scale so that they don't inherit the scale of the mechanism bones. So essentially what I'm just changing is the location and rotation of these deformed bones. And because these deformed bones do not rely on a bone chain, this solves the issue of um, Roblox's game engine not supporting the scale property, because I made this rig entirely dependent on the change in location and rotation of these deformed bones. So that's how this works, and that's how I'm able to get this to work nicely. This took me quite some time to figure out, but I'm glad I did. And I'm actually quite impressed by this, actually. So that's how I did the mechanism bones for now one. Now I did a similar thing for the mouth here. So only for the mouth, I did a bone chain again for the top and bottom. And so essentially, let me bring the curves here. I have two separate Bezier curves that control the upper and lower parts of the mouth respectively. And I had to do it this way because if I completed this Bezier curve here, some parts of this will stick out and like curve back like this instead of being straight. And while I could fix that, what I found worked better for me is to have two separate curves here to control the upper and lower parts of the lip. So basically, I did a similar process as to what I've done for the brows here, in which these deformed bones here, this one, let's say, I have an armature constraint, and it's targeting this mechanism bone here. And I have these controls over here. Basically, same process. I move these controls, which affect the curve, which therefore affects the spline IK chain, and therefore the deformed bones. So once again, I am using this technique of making a dummy spline IK bone chain and parenting the deformed bones to the chain and locking their scale out so that the deformed bones don't rely on each other's scale. Rather, they just rely on their own location and rotation to make the deformations. And as for the teeth, let me just bring the teeth back up. So these are the deformed bones for the teeth. They're much larger so that they're easier for me to see. And what I've done here is I have two planes. So this upper one here and this lower one. And essentially, and what I've done here is that these teeth bones, I have a shrink wrap modifier that targets the upper and lower cages depending on where they're positioned. And I should also mention that I'm referring to these bones here, these upper and lower set of bones that define the base of the teeth. So these bones here that reside on the base of the teeth, they have a shrink wrap modifier, and this shrink wrap modifier is targeting the upper and lower cages depending on where they're positioned. So these upper set are targeting the upper cage and the lower set the lower cage. And they're targeting that cage so that if I hide these, they look like they are inside the mouth and therefore not clipping past the mouth. So the system is still a bit sketchy, but like this is how it works. I'm using two cages that define the boundary of where these teeth bones are allowed to go. And so if I move these controls like so, it will move that, the cage will deform like that, and therefore these bones will move accordingly and change their location and rotation to match the cage. Now, as to how I did the cages, like have them follow this boundary, I just simply parented them to the deformed bones for the lips. Now, as for the inner set of teeth, I have to manually control them because I don't want to have to go through the trouble of making a complex constraint system that makes them confined to their boundaries. So I just manually control them with these controls here. So I can change their scale like this. And as you can see, this is a master control. Not a master control. This is actually a control mechanism bone. And basically, this parents all of these bones, these upper set of teeth bones here on each teeth mesh. And then they're parented to these mechanism bones, which copy the transforms of this control bone here. And so I can control their scale, rotation, and location. And what this allows me to do is that I can manually control the shape of these teeth bones here on this set. I'm referring to this set here. And then for these bones here, they control the shape of the base teeth deform bones as well. So for that, I just have a transformation constraint. And so basically, each of these deform bones on the base of the teeth, they track their own transformation. They have their own transformation constraint, and therefore they map their own transformations according to the position of this control bone here. And then these bones here, well, not bone, these control bones here, these are setting bones. And so these are specifically for toggling the visibility of the teeth. So I can toggle them on and off. And what they do is that they drive a copy location constraint. And so the copy location constraint is targeting one of these base bones here. So the copy location constraint is targeting their respective base bone. And so if I put this all the way to 1, they will go back to their base bone and essentially make them not visible. So another method that I use to control the visibility of the teeth mesh is the backface culling property. And basically, in Roblox Studio and other game engines like Unity and Unreal, there is one side of the mesh that is defined as the front and another side of the mesh that is defined as the rear. So this is a face here, and this is on the head model. So basically, backface culling, this is the front of the mesh. Like what you're seeing, how you're seeing this mesh right now, you're seeing the front. And if I go inside the mesh, you'll notice that you'll see nothing. Now, because you're inside the mesh, you're actually seeing the backside of all of these faces. And that's not visible, right? So that's basically backface culling. The backside of the faces are invisible to you, but the front side of the faces are not, and they're visible, and therefore they interact with the light. And so what I've done here is that by default, the teeth meshes are visible. And so to ensure that they don't stick out, I use the backface culling property to essentially make it so that the faces on the teeth are flipped when the rig is in its default state. So while you can see the teeth from this angle here, from the front, which is where you'll most likely be seeing it, you won't be seeing it. Now, of course, I can have these toggle gears here set so that you don't see them, but like that's just like another method that I use to make sure that the teeth are not visible when I don't want them to, as the mouth deforms and whatever. This also comes in handy whenever the mouth changes its shape, because as you can see here, different parts of the teeth mesh will need to be visible. And as you can see, as I move these controls, more of the teeth mesh will gradually become visible. And I use the backface culling to my advantage to make that happen, because if the backface culling is off, this is what it will look like. You'll see that, and you don't want that. So it's kind of like gonna break the rig the way how it looks. So by its default state, this is how it's gonna look, and it looks ugly. And then if I move these controls up, it'll also distort the mesh quite badly. So that's why I use the backface culling property, so to better control the way the teeth meshes appear whenever the lips whenever the mouth deforms like so. Obviously, this is still a sketchy system. I'm not I wouldn't consider myself pro at rigging yet, but I'm definitely not beginner. I would consider myself intermediate. I can grasp complex rigging techniques and apply them, but like I'm not at a level of high proficiency just yet. So that's some of the tech that I used in this man face redesign. So that explains how I rigged the mouth. Now for the eyes, I'll show you how I did the pupils. So remember how I talked about the floor constraint mechanism? So basically, this is the mechanism bone. These are the mechanism bones that I was referring to earlier. These act as a dummy. These are dummy bones that act as a floor. And so when I move this eye control here, the mechanism bone goes down, and you'll see that at a certain threshold, these deformed bones here on the pupils, they will go down as well. So that's one. There's the other. That's the other one. The third one, fourth, and fifth. And so essentially, I get a smooth motion where all of these deformed bones nicely compact together to make it so that the pupil doesn't stick out of the eye socket and break the illusion that the face is flat. So let's see it in motion again. So I move this down. This bone moves down first because the mechanism bone is past its threshold, and therefore it will go down. And the next one, and the next one. And there you go. So it smoothly comes. So all of these bones will smoothly come down and compact themselves together to make sure that the pupil doesn't stick out of the socket. And same thing for this one here. If I move this up, you'll see this bottom bone here will move up, then the next, and the next, and the next, and the last one. So how I order these is that I did the upper eyelid floor first. I don't think it matters the order, but it just matter. But the only thing that matters is the axis that you want the constraint to work with. So if I turn on the axis, you'll see that the upper eyelid floor starts from the negative z-axis of this bone here. So using the world space, once this bone goes down, so this is the negative z-axis here, this way down infinitely, and then I have an offset of negative 0.001 meters. Basically, they'll push the floor from this bone's origin down to here, and you'll see that like that. So the floor is defined as this area upwards. So this is the floor relative to this bone. It's defined as this area upwards. This area downwards is where the bone is allowed to move freely. But along the z-axis upwards, it cannot move that way. So that's why it's being pushed down. And then same thing for the rest of these bones. I increased their offset so that they don't like crush the mesh and make weird shading errors. So they will move down uniformly and compact themselves like that. And then same thing for the lower eyelid floor, which is this bone here. I have a floor constraint that's targeting this here, and then offset. And so the floor is defined as the negative z-axis starting from here going down. And so if that bone here goes past this threshold, it's going to be forced to go up because according to the world space, z-axis upwards, that's the space that the bone is allowed to move. But once it passes the threshold, once it goes into the negative z axis and down, that bone will be pushed up to the positive z axis so that it doesn't go there. So as you can see, like that. And then I have another mechanism bone here. I just select it. This is a mechanism bone. This does not control the deform, and this is basically a parent for all of these deform bones here. And so this mechanism bone controls the movement of the pupils. And so it's tracking these controls here, these subcontrols for the pupils, which are then connected to this master control, which controls the pupil movement. Now, the order of the constraint modifiers for the deform bones is also important. So the idea for this is to animate parent these deform bones to the controls first, and then the next step would be to project them onto the facial deform surface, which is this part here. And then of course, I also locked off their scale by adding this limit scale, setting the minimum and maximum values all to 1 to make their scale not change and stay the same. Now for the mouth bones, it's the mouth and teeth bones, they're pretty much the same, but there's an extra step. So before I even project them onto the surface, the facial deform surface, I project them onto for the teeth, I project them onto their cages first. So the upper set of bones, which would be these, I would project them onto the upper teeth cage, which is just this plane here. And then for the lower set, which is this, I would project them onto the lower teeth cage, which is this part here. And then after that, I project them onto the facial deform surface by adding the shrink wrap modifier afterwards. And same thing for the mouth, but they don't need to but they don't need to project onto the onto the teeth cages. And I also forgot to mention about how I projected this thing onto the head. So I don't use the head mesh itself. I actually use a separate mesh. This is the mesh that I use. This is a custom mesh. And the reason why I did this is because look at how consistent the geometry is, right? Now, look at the head. See this? That's not good. To me, that will cause the mesh to deform weirdly and may potentially cause weird protrusions that come from the mesh because of the uneven surface. So as much as possible, I have to use an even surface. So that's why I have this custom mesh here that kind of mimics the curvature of the head, but it is also flat. So to reduce the protrusions as much as possible. And then because of this method, I can change this however I want. So I can change this and adapt this for another head. So say a box, for example, I can project it flat like this, or I can like dynamically change this. So I can like change the scale of this to fit another head shape. Now this isn't the perfect system. It can be a bit finicky because of how I designed this rig, but like it still works. The concept is there, just like further refinement, and this should be a pretty good high fidelity rig for Roblox. So that explains my rigging process, the entire rigging process for this, and the clever techniques that I pulled off to make, and the clever techniques that I used from what I've learned about Roblox Studio and Blender to make this possible. And now I'll show you how all of these controls work. So I already prepared an animation prior to recording this video. So this is how all the controls work. See that? So you can see the browse. So this is how the browse work. So these are meant to be stationary, but I have these here as controls for extra movement if necessary. So these control points, these control bones here, once again they control these mechanism bones, as you can see, the spline IK chains, which are therefore controlling the deform bones, like so. And then for the eyes, this master eye control here, this controls the location of all of these pupil deform bones, which are then parented to the master, which are then parented to a mechanism bone that acts as a parent for all of these, that tracks the location, the location of the master eye control. And then you can also see the floor constraints in action on this eye here as it blinks, right? You can also see how these bones move here for the eyes. Like I said, they only go up and down. They don't need to go side to side. So right here, when I pause it, you'll see that because of how I designed this mesh here, they are, when they close, they look they look consistent, uniform, right? There's no like weird protrusions besides the pupil, because the pupil's like hovering ever so slightly above the eye socket. Well, there's a little bit here, but like that's because of how I designed the model. But like for the majority of the mesh, it's mostly uniform, and so you don't see a lot of anything protruding out, right? So that's how the eyes work. And then for the mouth, you see these controls in action, right? So these are individual control points that I control to control the shape of the mouth. Why is it lagging? And then if I bring up the teeth, and the teeth controls as well, you'll see those in action as well. So you'll see these center controls here. They control they control these parts of the teeth. They control their location and rotation as well. These parts control the base, the shape of the bases. They control the shape of the base of the teeth meshes, and these ones control the visibility, and you'll see those in action as the mouth deforms. So they come in together smoothly, and I'm surprised they work quite smoothly given how complex this is to make. So that's how the rig works. Okay, so this is how I would export this. So I would first export this without the animations. So limit selection to selected objects. So with all of these three meshes selected, the teeth, face, and rig, it's going to export that. I separated the teeth and face mesh because apparently Roblox does not like that. It just makes the meshes look weird. So I separated the teeth mesh, and it turned out to work much better for me. So I separated those, and that's something to watch out for if you want to make face rigs like this. So I would uncheck the box that says animation and set the scale to 0.01 so that when I import this into Roblox, it will be correctly scaled, because if I set this to 1, it will be 100 times bigger in Roblox Studio. So I named this manface underscore no anims, and I'm exporting it as an FBX. So I already have my character here to try on. So let's import. So here it is. So there we go. And I'll just check the model. So it has worked for me previously, but like there's still a bit of inconsistency with the teeth mesh here. So unfortunately, I'm not sure how I'm gonna troubleshoot it, but like there seems to be an inconsistency with the teeth mesh because upon import it looks slightly different. Like some of the vertices are like displaced. And I'm not sure why it's like that. I had this issue before when I imported it first, but I was able to fix it. But now it's happening again, and I'm not sure how to do that, how to fix it, because I'm no longer making Roblox animations anymore. But I think it'll be fine for the sake of this breakdown. This is only just a breakdown after all. I'm not making like a animation. Oh, oh, it seems to have fixed itself somewhat, but now the lips are distorted. That's very odd. Yeah, Roblox is very strange when it comes to importing these kinds of meshes. Whether or not it's a issue with the file, it's definitely showing that Roblox does not like meshes like this. So I just position it like that. So this is already rigged upon import. So if I open Moon Animator, it registers it as a rig. And so you have these options here. Ignore the background. So I'm gonna put these in a folder. So what I would do first is that I would I'd weld these to the teeth. So I would weld the face to the teeth and make sure it's not animatable. Join in place. Oh, I don't think that's the right order. So base part is the teeth, and it's gonna weld the face to the teeth. There. Then I would weld the teeth to the head. So now if I if I have an animation on, so now if I have, so if I make an animation, the head will follow, just like that. The face rig follows the head. Okay, so let's import an animation. So first of all, I'd have to export the animation. So with the same meshes selected, I'd go to export, then rename this to anims, manface underscore anims. Make sure that the animation box is checked off. Export. It's going to take a while, but it will load. Yep, that's it. So the lips are distorted weirdly. I'm not sure why. Just another export issue, I guess, with Roblox. Roblox doesn't seem to like this very much, which is... And I was able to fix this issue before, but like, this is still finicky to deal with. So yeah. And then when I make an animation, so let me import one of the animations I have for my character. There we go. Then I would add the rig. So just that. Then I would import the animation. So it'll be this. There we go. Now if I play the animation, there we go. You now have an animated custom dynamic head for Roblox. So I won't be able to make this as UGC, and I also can't distribute this outside of Roblox because of their terms of service. I don't have the time and effort to make this as UGC, so I won't be able to do that. But I am working on a tutorial video about a simpler version. I do believe that it is possible to make custom UGC dynamic heads, but I am not sure if those will work with custom dynamic head setups or animated face setups because, of course, my design doesn't follow Roblox's dynamic head system. But I was able to bring it into Roblox, and I think that with a bit more refinement, it's very much possible to turn this into UGC. But I've shown you how I made mine, and you can go and make your own. I want to see what you guys will make.